Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. And I just want to send a reminder out there that if you're watching us on YouTube, please click subscribe. That really helps us stay on the air. Please like us. And if you so choose, you can support us on Patreon. So today's guest is pretty fascinating. She's going to be talking about a subject that I really have very little acquaintance with. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to say, and I think what she has to share based on reading her book is going to be of great interest to you, my audience. Kate Rose is a writer, a spiritual astrologist, bespoke retreat curator, and human relationship expert. She says that her purpose is to help people open their hearts to heal and embrace the radical acceptance of self-growth so that they may live more authentically, love more fully, and seize each day, each moment as the divine gift that it is. And I can tell you, I believe everything in that statement. I also think from my research that she's also a therapist. So
yes, that is correct. That's where my
even though
roots
you
are.
didn't put that in your bio to me, I wanted to mention that she's also a therapist, and she offers retreats. So without further introduction, I'm going to turn the mic over to Kate Rose to give us some background on her spiritual journey from childhood until now, and then we'll get into her book and some of her philosophy. Kate, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today, Bob. I'm so excited to be here and be part of this. My spiritual journey was one, I think, as a child, I wasn't really taught that what I was doing was spirituality, as it was more religion based. But even in that foundation, there was still that aspect of what do we believe? And I had a grandmother who, although she was part of the Catholic religion when I was growing up, she also believed in so much more. She ended up, she kind of connected me to the natural world, and we would talk about our ancestors, and we would be out in nature. And she had that within her that potentially maybe she didn't really bring out. Over the course of my life, this aspect of spirituality played out where for a long time I was looking for something. I was looking for what that connection meant to me. And I tried almost every religion that you could try. I have been a part of it at one point or another. On my travels with my daughters, I visit any sort of, let's say, religious or worship facility, temple out there, as kind of part of my experience. And I think for me overall, that aspect of spirituality has been one that was founded in my childhood in just the simple idea of believing in something, even if we can't necessarily identify it or be able to see it in front of us, because that's really what spirituality is, both within the universe and I think within ourselves. But it really wasn't until I went through my divorce and I was suddenly a single mom that I felt like I really developed and kind of came into my own sense of spirituality, what it means to me, and how it ends up affecting my life. Because there's a lot of faith that goes into being able to take big leaps in life. And having faith is also, I think, an asset and part of spirituality.
Okay, so you were raised Catholic?
I was raised Catholic. I also spent time in the Lutheran Church, the Episcopalian Church, as well as the Baptist Church.
Oh, okay.
That's what I mean. But I
Okay, so
was
lots of
raised,
sampling. Yeah.
yes, lots of sampling.
Okay. So what led you toward astrology? How did that come about?
That actually began when I was a child. My mom had like the sun signs books in her house that she had. And I would read them at 7, 9 years old. It just seemed fascinating to me. I don't know if I even knew or was able to comprehend what it all meant at that point, but I knew that I was drawn to it. My personal belief is that our souls do keep getting reincarnated, and oftentimes, if children are attracted to something, in my belief, it generally means that it was something that carried over from a past life. So I do believe that this was something that I kind of came into this life with. But once I started writing, again, in that aspect of spirituality, I recognized the significance that the moon phases had over my life, over people that I knew, their lives, and even my own children. And so those were the first kind of pieces that I really started writing, was about the full and new moons. And from there, it kind of just ended up developing into not only just a passion, but something that felt like we could really connect with kind of as a collective.
So this belief in reincarnation, you say you've just always had it. It wasn't something you read about or uh, got from somebody else?
Well, I think a lot of it did come from my babshi. That was my grandmother that I mentioned early on. Again, even though she was raised Catholic, in our family, there was that idea that there were women that had gifts, and she didn't tap into it. She would have guilt about doing it. But she was a very spiritual person. And so that was really first introduced by her. And of course, I've read other things. But I do believe, my personal belief is that we do travel over a period of different lifetimes, learning the lessons that we're meant to, as we kind of hopefully become a healthier and more whole human.
Yeah. So as you've navigated a variety of different religions, as you mentioned, uh,
Yes.
are you still a churchgoer, or have you just said, no, that's not working for me, and astrology is all I care about now?
I currently do not go to church, but in my practice, in my blessings, in my prayers, which I still do, I include all. When I talk to the universe, I talk to the universe, ancestors, God. For me, it's not separate. I think in many ways, in having gone to different religions and visiting different places of worship in different countries, I feel like generally we're all doing the same thing, even if the means looks different. So for me, let's say, yesterday was Sunday. I went for a walk early in the morning by myself and noticed the colors of the trees changing and the leaves falling. And for me, that was a very spiritual experience, not just good for my physical body, but I felt connected to the world, to the universe.
Yeah. So I guess my introduction to astrology, uh, other than the things that are in the newspaper that they say, uh, that this is for entertainment purposes only,
Mhm.
and we we take no responsibility for what you do with this information.
Yes,
Uh,
that is correct.
yeah, was I guess through the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is the Edgar Casey Foundation, and as part of becoming a member there, they send you your astrological chart.
Oh,
And
really?
when I
That's
received
fascinating.
that, and that was many years ago, that was about 40 years ago, uh, I looked at that and thought, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? You know what? To me, it was kind of meaningless. Uh, Now, in reading your book, I got a sense that okay, this is one use of astrological charts. I'm sure there are others, but you focus on the relationship aspect of astrological charts. Often, when I know someone else, I don't necessarily know the date and time of their birth. So I don't get that information. Although I have been married 4 times. Uh, I have been
Interesting.
through the stages of love
Oh, so I
that
would love to do all your charts.
that you outline in this book. But I don't know if it would help because even though I know the dates of people's birthdays, I don't know what time they were born. So I'm, my sense is that without that timestamp, that the date really is pretty meaningless. I don't know. Can you can you talk
So
about that?
yeah, of course. And I mean, and it happens a lot of times. People can really find almost out anything online. I've known people to go to quite the extreme to find the exact time. The exact time is, of course, the ideal situation. But like you were saying, in a lot of times or situations, that's not always available to us. Um, it doesn't mean that the date is kind of meaningless unto itself. For the majority of planets, like certain planets only switch signs every 13 years. So that's not really going to change very much. Moon usually changes sign every 3 days. The only thing that it really that day, unless a planet, let's say, shifts from, in the morning it starts in Virgo and then in the afternoon it moves to Libra, other than those types of situations, a lot of times it really only, let's say, affects mostly like the nodes of fate, the north node and south node, which can change kind of periodically throughout the day. So even just having a basis of saying, okay, well, I don't know the time. One, it's something that we could test out and say, okay, if we pick a morning, an afternoon, and an evening, does anything change? Many times, nothing changes if you even pick those 3 times for the specific kind of astrology. So it's something where the time can always be flexible for this. And the idea is that most likely, even let's say without the definitive time, comparing the birth charts with ourselves and our parents or caregivers, you're still going to be able to end up seeing the same lessons repeated, or, kind of an indication in this type of astrology, let's say what your growth purpose is. Like, what is the purpose of this connection that you're moving through?
Okay. So you mentioned north and south nodes. So for my audience, would you explain what those are and the significance of that?
Yes, please. So the North and South node in astrology aren't actually planets. They are mathematical points on the moon, and our eclipse cycle is tied with them. So, for instance, we have a Libra eclipse coming up next month. That's something that's kind of governed by the nodes. The North node in astrology rules your fate. It is, let's say, the divine purpose of your soul in this lifetime, although it won't just happen. The North Node fate is really dependent upon the lessons that we learn at the South Node. The South Node is one of 2 places in the astrological chart that carries with it karma or karmic lessons. It has a very beautiful name of the soul's undoing. A lot of times, a lot of our generational trauma and lessons can also be rooted in the South Node that we have to move through. So, the South Node usually represents more difficulty, more challenges, where the North Node represents greater ease and fulfillment.
Okay, so when you talk about karmic lessons,
Yes.
is that lessons to be learned from one lifetime to the next, or what makes it karmic?
So, in looking at the karmic lessons, the idea is one, every soul, let's say, if we have a soul contract, not only did we sign up for all the wonderful moments, but we signed up to be born into a particular family, to travel a certain path, and also to learn lessons. Karmic lessons are really just the lessons that we are meant to learn in our lifetime. While a lot of times it can be very challenging, hard even to learn karmic lessons, they're not negative or bad unto themselves. Karmic lessons really just mean that, let's say, if we want to use that kind of theory or idea of different lifetimes and reincarnation, that this is something that you have been born into multiple lives with, and that your purpose in this lifetime is one where you are really meant to kind of be able to grow and heal. And part of that is being able to move through generationally and personally those karmic lessons.
Okay, so in this book that you've written, uh, you focus on the fact that typically we only have three loves. And first, I want to establish, is that all within one lifetime, or can that be over multiple lifetimes? Like you get stuck with your soulmate first. It sounds odd maybe to my audience right now until you explain the difference in these, but so you're stuck a whole lifetime with a soulmate situation. In
So
fact,
oh,
go
please go
ahead.
ahead. I'm sorry. So the three loves are really three types of love. In that it's that we could, like you had even mentioned, you've been married multiple times. So we might love 8, 9, 10 different times in our lifetime, but we really will only end up having three different types of love. In this process, I don't look at it as, let's say, that we are stuck with a soulmate in a particular lifetime. I think it's what we choose. I think it's based on our lessons. I do think that as we're seeing kind of more, even, shows like this, we are kind of evolving as a society, and we are talking more about spirituality and growth and healing, which means it's not just our souls or how we live our life, it's also our relationships that are involving. So many times in previous generations, people did marry and remain with their soulmate. But that doesn't mean it was bad or awful. It's just that in many times in our society, that idea of thriving to personal growth wasn't really the focus of that generation. So as we are growing, as we are seeking kind of that personal development and becoming more aware of different modalities, we're now seeing things as not necessarily a definite. It's more of a vehicle for growth. What was this meant to show me? And also having more opportunities to, let's say, exit a relationship or marriage. So while the soulmate is really the beginning spot, the karmic relationship is really the one that does teach us those hard lessons, but also really provides us that ability to kind of know who we truly are, to heal a lot of what we've been through, which kind of leads the way for more conscious, more aware, and healthier relationships.
So as I have to tell you, your book made me feel better about myself.
That's
In
my goal, Bob. I'm so happy to hear that.
well, well, because I'd gone through three divorces and found found uh, my twin, uh, and we've been in that marriage for over 33 years and have two lovely children, and it's just been wonderful and totally different from the other love relationships. Uh, and I, I had a view of myself of saying, okay, I can't wait for another lifetime. I'm going to make these changes now. And I feel
Yes,
like I've lived 4 lifetimes within this one lifetime.
I
But,
understand.
uh, reading your book made me sense, oh, well, that's why that happened. And that's why I chose the way I chose. And wow, this is okay. I may have found someone who really understands me here.
Well, I mean, and that's part of it though, is that, we're not perfect. We're perfectly imperfect humans, right? Our souls are perfectly as they should be, but we're humans, and it means we're inevitably not necessarily going to make the decision that's maybe in alignment with our highest self, or that we can feel aligned with 20 years down the road. But in this process, it seems like so many people, and I am divorced myself, where we, if we've been through a lot, we get down on ourselves, and I've heard people say, I just don't know how to pick people, or, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, or, they constantly beat themselves up over that one relationship that took them so long to see the truth in. But in reality, it all, if we can learn something from it, then it would have served its purpose. And in it, learning something and learning its purpose also means that it's not something, I truly don't believe that we should hold it against ourselves. That just as, again, that amazing moment you're talking about, your beautiful marriage with your wife, that's incredible. But it was the other three marriages that you've been through that allowed you to be able to be in the space for that. And I do truly believe that.
Well, I do too, because I just appreciate her so much. uh, and it's just one of those things. And it's growth, like you say. It is growth. So this the sense that I get is that in reading this book, someone who's married but not in a relationship that is uh, giving them what they need at this point in time, and it used to meet those needs, and now it no longer does. Even though the relationship hasn't changed one bit, the needs have changed. So this is sort of like permission to get out of a relationship. And
Yeah.
so I wonder about the therapy that you do. I mean, do people come to you because you're a therapist and you throw in the astrological point of view? Or do people come to you because you're an astrologer and you throw in the therapy aspect as an added benefit? How does that work?
So I think there's a spectrum of this. So I think that there's definitely people that have connected with me and said, oh, okay, this sounds good. And then I might, kind of bring up something about the astrology, and then they become interested. There's people who will kind of reach out or look for a reading. And I let them know I don't do astrology readings on when you're going to get rich or when you're going to get married. It's really all about, because even with this type of astrology, it's really about understanding yourself more deeply. But for the most part, I think I hear from people who are looking for someone, kind of like you had said yourself, that maybe understands what they're going through. And in a lot of my writing, it in past and current, it's not about judgment. It's not about, black and white, do this or don't do that. It's very much looking at the process. So I think most people come to me maybe in the middle of that spectrum. And truthfully, I think they are looking to see if they can be understood. If there's, again, am I crazy? Is there something so wrong with what I'm doing? Why do I feel this way? And so even though we have, therapy, counseling, and astrology, I feel like the majority of people that have contacted me is because either they already feel understood or they're hoping to maybe feel that.
Yeah. So you also do retreats. What happens on a retreat with Kate Rose? And why
Well,
would
we
I
can't
sign up
tell,
for
can
one?
we? Our retreats, I had to play a little joke because we joke about that. There's some women that have come on a few of them, and we have our jokes that it's like our, kind of our little inner sanctum. The retreats are wonderful. One of, I read once, is a quote that, the life of a writer is one that is lonely. A lot of times you're by yourself, and I enjoy it. I love, and I have two children, so I'm never really quite by myself. But it is, you're in your head, you're thinking, you're writing, you're planning. And so I love connecting with people and talking with them. But the retreat is something that's so very different. It's somewhere kind of in the world. We've been to Mexico, Bali, Costa Rica, kind of all across Central America. And during this week, it is unlike a lot of other retreats. There is often a very much more unstructured schedule. We will still meet in the mornings, but it's also really all about enforcing self care and that downtime, because I think a lot of people in our society, we become accustomed to living schedule by schedule, and in that kind of strict time frame, there's not a lot of opportunity for soul growth. So sleeping in, caring for ourselves, being able to meet a yoga pavilion at 8 or 9 a.m. after we've rested before breakfast. um, We'll have evening workshops that center around kind of whatever the theme it is, whether it's exploring what joy means to us, looking at our birth charts, or even being able to identify kind of what's holding us back from making those big life decisions. Um, but the retreats are meant to be fun. They're not meant to feel like a chore. We laugh a lot. We hike mountains and go to waterfalls and jump off cliffs and do all the wonderful things. And really, that's why it feels more like a soul experience than just a retreat, because I want people to always feel like they went on vacation. I don't want people to go home even more exhausted than when they came, which a lot of times for certain trips, we can feel like that. So, truthfully, being able to kind of all be surrounded by an amazing group of women and laughing until our stomachs hurt, I feel like is as enriching as the workshop itself.
Yeah. So a typical retreat involves how many people? 20 people, 10 people?
No more than 10, because I had done yeah, I had done one a long time ago with only 12. But even then I didn't feel like I was able to have that personal time or connection with everybody. So no more than 10. Usually I like to keep it around 8. So they're very intimate, they're very small. It is somewhere that so far they tend to be warmer, or at least kind of in the summer months, but it's really about being able to have one-on-one time with me, being able to have time with the other women, because how I look at it, especially with having been doing them for so many years, is that in my mind the dynamic of the group should be as beneficial as time with me unto itself. So it's really like curating, like, what is this group of women? And then sometimes, often, I end up kind of changing different workshops or themes just based on what the group is kind of coming through as at that time.
Okay. So in our discussion so far, it sounds very woman focused, but I did notice in your book that you do have stories and examples that come from the male aspect. So I just
Yes,
wanted to be sure that my audience didn't get the sense that you're just there for women.
not by any means. I've hosted couples retreats as well, which have been absolutely amazing. And for the couples retreats, same thing, that is kind of maxed out at 3 to 4 couples, just because of the time that I choose and want to kind of put into the experience. But I speak with men just as much as I speak with women. And oftentimes about very much the same issues. Kind of interesting. I mean, there are obviously differences within each of us and everyone in the world, but there are just as many men out there that I do connect with.
So would you go through those three types of love relationships, because we referenced them, but we really didn't allow you to define what they were and the importance of them, and uh, is it critical that to get to number three you have to go through numbers one and two, or does it ever happen that you discover number three, uh, in this lifetime early on, and you've got that beautiful relationship going forward?
So I'll talk about the 3 types of love first, then kind of go into the questions that you had asked. So the 3 types of love are soulmate, karmic, and twin flame or third love. The soulmate relationship is usually one that we enter into first or early on in our life. The soulmate relationship is with someone from a similar soul family, and there are often a lot of times similarities between the two individuals. There's also that space of similar backgrounds. Many soulmates can even look like one another, but there is a big sense of familiarity. The number one thing with the soulmate is that we end up choosing this person because they look like the person that we should be with. They look like the person that maybe we had growing up in our household, or that type of marriage or relationship, maybe someone from a similar background or even religious belief. Our soulmate is someone that is quite similar. In that relationship, the soulmate never gets, let's say, as challenging as the karmic relationship, but it also never actually changes either. The soulmate relationship is one that it will kind of just stay that status quo as long as both people are okay with that. The problem becomes is if one or both people suddenly experience something in their own life or reach a certain point in their own journey, and they're starting to question who they are. They're starting to question what their truth is. Who am I without this relationship? Is this the relationship I really would have chosen at, let's say 45? And so ultimately, the relationship with the soulmate really comes about through the separation of, I need to figure out who I am. And this person, there might not be anything wrong with them, might not be a bad relationship, but we can't figure out who we are as long as we're in something that makes us so comfortable. The soulmate relationship also really represents that aspect of, let's say, kind of the archetypes. We have these developmental phases. And so the soulmate really represents that child where we're kind of just simply doing what we have been taught or conditioned to do without actually thinking for ourselves or being able to have the kind of foresight or introspection to choose what feels authentic for us. When we leave the soulmate relationship, we are choosing ourselves in that moment, and we're wanting to kind of learn who we are and begin this path of truth. But we're feeling empowered from our decision, and we're craving excitement. And so oftentimes we attract the karmic relationship. Many times when people meet their karmic relationship, they actually think it's their twin flame because of the chemistry and the connection. And they feel like they've known this person, and they also can't separate from this person. They can't get enough of them. And the karmic relationship, though, no matter how intense or incredible it can feel at times, the karmic relationship will only ever end the same way, meaning that it never actually develops, let's say, into that healthy, consistent relationship. It may be on again, off again. Toxic behaviors or unhealthy behaviors may continue to resurface. There might be unemotionally available people in the situation. It's just a connection that will never actually come together, very rarely, because it's not necessarily meant to. The karmic relationship, the entire purpose is to heal our childhood wounds and conditioning. But ultimately, it also has that space of teaching us that we are worthy of receiving love. So at a certain point in the karmic relationship, one of the kind of most pinnacle moments is realizing that we are worthy of a consistent, healthy love. We're worthy of someone doing nice things for us too and showing up for us too. And so at that point, we usually make the separation from our karmic. We might try to end the karmic at other times, but until we're in that place of really knowing what we are worth, we will often kind of continue to repeat that cycle with them. Once we've kind of moved through the twin flame or the soulmate and karmic relationship, at this point, we've now also moved through, let's say, the stages of development, the soulmate being the child and the karmic being that rebellious teenager who's trying to find themselves and figure out what life is. At this point, after the karmic, we're also kind of really heading into that healing adult phase where we're not abandoning any part of ourselves, but we also know which part is which. We're not going to necessarily just live from our inner teenager. We're not going to, just do our inner child, what everyone else expects of us. And so we've kind of embodied all of these different parts of ourselves. And that's what allows us to approach love in a healthier and different way. So after the karmic, we reach the point where we're saying we have no problem being able to articulate our needs or knowing what it is that we're worth. We're able to explain what we've been through, what we know about ourselves, any triggers that we have, and that growth aspect becomes so important so that when we do meet someone at that point, that's what makes the relationship a twin flame. That's what makes it so healthy because we're now in the place to actually have that type of relationship. with saying that, and even using those kind of archetypes of the child, the teenager, and that healing adult self, it's incredibly rare. I have not yet seen it in my work to have one relationship be able to be all three, because the karmic relationship ends up being so painful and toxic that once we're out of it, we can't imagine that being one that we would actually want to remain in. But also because to have a relationship be all three also comes down to the necessity of the other person being at almost the precise same point as we are at every point of our journey. And unfortunately, as we know, the only thing we can count on is where we're at. We can't really place that upon somebody else. I know people who choose to stay in their soulmate relationship. Doesn't mean that they're not going to have hardships, doesn't make it a karmic relationship if we do. And that's those instances where I believe that's what their purpose is in this lifetime. And there's nothing bad or wrong about it. It's just being able to appreciate the purpose for whatever it is. But no, in the terms of, it's almost like if our sense of self changes so much dramatically throughout our life, especially that child, teenager, and healing adult, then that also means that the person we're attracted to is likely going to change. The type of love that we're going to give and need is likely going to change. So there's just so many factors there that it seems to be more representative of three different types of relationships.
So, do you get to skip the karmic if you can you move the twin flame? I guess I'm thinking about the typical midlife crisis,
Mm.
and we see that in a lot of males, but I assume that women can go through that too. It's not just a male kind of thing. So,
Oh, and did you know that the midlife crisis is actually attributed to their Saturn return? That's what actually creates that moment. So even the midlife
oh,
crisis
wait a
has
minute. Okay,
astrological roots.
repeat.
Yeah.
And how does that work? How did you figure
So
that one out?
So Saturn is the place, we said that there's karma in two spots. So the first being kind of the south node, which is more generational karma. So it's what you kind of accumulated from your ancestors or your childhood. The other place that karma occurs is Saturn. Now, Saturn's kind of nickname or themes are it is the Lord of time and karma. It also rules karmic lessons and boundaries. So if we're looking at our birth chart and we're saying, okay, my Saturn was in Pisces when I was born, it takes Saturn approximately kind of that span of midlife or midlife, maybe even prior, when we first would kind of have those inclinations. So when Saturn goes back, let's say into Pisces, that's called your Saturn return. And so when we have our Saturn return, the first one especially, it ends up being a time of awakening because it's almost like a check in. Have we learned our lessons? Are we on our divine path? Are we appreciating the time that we have had and that we hope to have in the future? And so the Saturn return time, which usually lasts for about 2 to 3 years, usually ends up being a really challenging time, not necessarily because it's a midlife crisis, but because we're kind of facing some of those karmic lessons that maybe we've tried to avoid.
Okay. So what's next for Kate Rose? Is there another book in the offing, another one you're working on already?
I am not working on another one as of now, but I have lots of ideas. I think that there is a lot to be written about in terms of even the astrology and the spirituality aspect of parenting, as well as, okay, well, once we have found our twin flame, what do we do then? Because we could find our twin flame in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. So many times it's still looking that there's no relationship that's ultimately the end point of the journey. So if the twin flame and meeting them and progressing through your life is just the beginning point of sorts, then it means where does that journey actually go once you've moved into that third love?
Yeah. Well, I recently became a grandpa for the first time just
Oh,
a couple weeks ago,
congratulations.
and I'm wondering what the value would be having a birth chart for the newborn and the birth charts of the two parents, and how that would affect child rearing, or, would that give them information that would help them in that child rearing situation?
It absolutely would, especially I always say too, as long as we're open to something, it will serve a benefit. So if the parents were open to it and we say, okay, we're going to take their birth charts with the child's, one, we would be able to see, which we can, that's part of what Written in the Stars is all about, is that sometimes we can see where a certain parent might be more a part of their lessons or their hardships that they might have to go through. If we were to do, let's say, a chart of a baby or a young child, and the parents were open and receptive, then that might give them something to be mindful of. Like, for instance, is there, let's say, a tendency to, kind of guide or push a child down a certain path that could be potentially represented by Jupiter and kind of their let's say south node. So it could also be in how are we communicating to the child. If one parent has their Mercury in Aries and the child has their Mercury in Cancer, then they're going to thrive in a very different type of communication. So I think I've looked at it for myself and my daughters as well. And I think it is of benefit, not that it's, let's say, potentially going to change anything, but the parents have more idea of, let's say, how they can, let's say, show up more as the parent that they want to be, or even things to be mindful of as their child gets older.
And that made me think, well, the heck with the parents. The grandparents could.
Grandparents are just as important. So I completely agree. And it is. And that's the thing, is that, so I went because I did this obviously on myself as well. I was one of my own guinea pigs. So I did it as far back as my great grandparents on my mother's side. And so even, and that's kind of where it gets that like genealogy or gynecological astrology. And so you can tell that even in just myself with them, there's an absolute connection. You can see it kind of coming through the birth charts. And, even that, my grandmother, my Bapshi that I spoke of, you can see even the connection between her and my chart. So I absolutely think that even as a grandparent, it would be a benefit.
So if any of our listeners are interested in following up with you after we're done in a few minutes here, how do they do that?
They can find me on my website at Words of Kate Rose. I'm on Instagram, Words of Kate Rose as well. Facebook is Words of Kate Rose Club, and they can email me and get in touch and connect with me from there.
Okay. I will have those contacts on my website under resources. So if you didn't catch them just now, you can check out yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com under resources, under Kate Rose, and find them. So Kate, we're nearing that point where I always invite the guest to leave our audience with a few words of wisdom, and I know your book's full of them. I was really enjoying toward the end you talk about appreciation and how important that is. But I'll let you go with a few words of wisdom that you might leave the audience with.
Oh, thank you. I would say for everyone that you were born for here with a purpose. You were born for a reason, and that the dreams that you have, the intuition, the inclination that you have is all for a reason. And so it's about trusting your heart and letting yourself take the risks necessary to make the changes that you need in your life.
Okay. Audience, you heard it here. And as always, just take what resonates with you and implement it into your life. Put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.